Our third Engage in our lecture series. I think most of you have been here for these before, so you know the story. I'm going to present some material to you, then we open it up for Q&A. If you were at the class this afternoon, you got all of this stuff already. So redundancy is redundant, so stick with me. Tonight's topic is Jesus. You know, the idea in the Engage lectures, we've done the Bible, we've done God, we've done Jesus, is to present, you know, what does the Bible say about these things? Not what does anybody else say about these things, but what does the Bible say about these things? Because ultimately, you have to make your own decisions about the material itself. And the only way you can make a good decision is to know what the material is. And I think a lot of people end up making decisions about God just based on things that they've heard or things that they think. And that's probably not the best way to make a decision about God. Maybe another equally as bad decision, way to make a decision about God, is to make that decision based on how I was raised. I was raised a particular way, and this is what I was taught when I was a kid, and I made my decisions about God based on that. That's probably not real good either, because as you know, for those of you that are parents, and it's apparent that I'm not a parent, you'll tell your kids all kinds of stuff for all kinds of reasons, maybe good reasons, maybe not so good reasons, but you tell your kids all kinds of stuff, and they'll believe it. True or not, right or not, and we all know, either in our own lives or the lives of other people, that young people grow up believing basically just what their parents tell them to believe, and that's it. But the material here that we're covering, like who is God and who is Jesus, and what is the Bible, these are things that you need to make an intelligent, informed decision about yourself. And so that's part of the purpose of this, is to be able to give you the material, and then you can make an intelligent, rational decision, or hopefully take what I say and give further thought and consideration to it. Because although I'm doing my best to present just the basic facts of the topic, it still is entirely possible that I may have left something out or included something that wasn't important or relevant to you. So it's incumbent upon all of us to do our homework on all of these things, so that wherever you end up in the belief spectrum, whether you believe or whether you disbelieve, that you do so in an intelligent and informed and rational way. So that's really, really important to me. And so our topic of conversation tonight is Jesus. And I don't think there's any question at all that the most beloved and controversial figure in all of history would be Jesus. I don't think you'd come up with anybody that would be more loved or controversial than him. Whether he is the source of dividing time between BC and AD, although that's been reviewed now to be BCE, before the Common Era, which I don't entirely understand that, but you know, whatever. You know, take Christ out of it as best as they can. That the idea is, okay, Jesus divides time. So when we look at what does the Bible say about Jesus, one of the things that we're going to focus on today is what Jesus says about himself. Now, anybody can say anybody or anything about anybody, right? You can say all kinds of things about me. Maybe some of them are true, maybe some of them aren't. So are you biting on your tongue over there? You've got blood coming out. Or anybody can say anything about you that they want to, and it doesn't necessarily make it true, and you may not want to formulate your opinion based on what someone else says about you. Well, I think the same thing is true about Jesus or about God. You don't want to formulate your opinion based on what someone else says about it. So one of the things we're going to focus on here this evening is what does Jesus say about himself? What are the claims that he makes about himself? Now, just to kick things off, I wanted to cover a couple of things that I think are crucial to the discussion about who is Jesus. One thing is that virtually every religion in the world has an opinion about Jesus. Doesn't matter what religion it is, whether it's Buddhism, which is fundamentally atheistic, whether it's Hinduism, which has literally millions of gods, whether it's Islam and its false god Allah, whatever it is that they may view or believe, they all have an opinion about who Jesus is. And every single religion that I've ever looked into or studied that has a view about Jesus, they're all different than the view of Jesus as he presents himself in the Bible. Now, we've already had a discussion here on the Bible, whether we could trust it, whether it's trustworthy, reliable, whether it's an accurate recording of the historical events, whether it's been handed down to us in a faithful and reliable form. So we've already dealt with those issues. So if that's still an issue in your mind as I present the material about Jesus from the Bible, then we need to go back and have that discussion again about if the Bible is an accurate or a reliable historical record. So when we look at the things that Jesus says about himself, can we trust the Bible to have accurately and faithfully recorded what Jesus actually said? Well, in our discussion on that here a couple of weeks ago, we pretty much laid most common objections to rest on that issue. So if you want to know what Jesus said, this is by far and above the most accurate and reliable source for the words of Jesus. You will not find anywhere in the world today a more accurate or reliable source for what Jesus said himself than the Bible itself. Now, one of the things about understanding who Jesus is from the biblical view is to understand a couple of other things. And one is my first point this evening, and that's the pre-existence of Christ, the fact that Jesus existed in heaven before he came here to earth. Now, we get clues about this all the way back in the book of Genesis, in a place like, in the beginning, God. Some of the names that are used for God in the book of Genesis indicate that he is more than one. And then when we get to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God says, "Let us make man in our image." Well, who's he talking to? Who's he talking with? Apparently God is not alone up there. And you can't say that he might have been talking to an angel, because nowhere in the biblical text is an angel ever credited with participating in the divine act of creation. But Jesus is, repeatedly throughout the New Testament. So, our first hint here is that God's not alone. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Even though God is one, and we looked into that here last week, even though God is one, God has chosen to manifest himself as three in one. That is the doctrine of the Trinity. So when he says things like, "Let us create man in our image," then he is including more than just his singular self in the conversation. John's gospel also addresses Jesus in this way. In John chapter 1, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." It's a direct reference to Christ himself. You can also read about Jesus being a participant, a co-participant in the act of creation in the book of Colossians, chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. So the Bible clearly states, throughout the New Testament in particular, that Jesus not only was present at creation, but he was present before creation and was an active participant in the act of creating. So, in addition to Jesus being present in all eternity, an active creator to all things, he would occasionally put in guest appearances here on earth. He would occasionally show up in what are commonly referred to in the Old Testament as a theophany, an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament, and oftentimes underneath the guise or underneath the terminology of the angel of the Lord. Now you'll see multiple references to an angel of the Lord, but commonly when you see references to the angel of the Lord, that is a common reference to an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament. I've got a number of references up there for you if you wanted to look them up, like Genesis 18, Joshua 5, Judges 6, Daniel chapter 3. There's plenty of others, but there's a few to get you started. Now, this also does not take into account the over 300 Old Testament prophecies concerning this Messiah that was to come. Over 300 individual prophecies made throughout the whole course of the Old Testament that said Jesus was going to come in both terms explicit and implicit. Now, how many of those did Jesus fulfill in his incarnation on earth? Well, he fulfilled all 300 of them. Now, if you want to just play this thing on the odds, if you want to do a little statistical probabilities, what are the odds that any one person could fulfill even half of those prophecies, even if they tried? I mean, there are certain things that Jesus obviously couldn't manipulate. He couldn't manipulate, where he was born. He might have been able to get himself arrested. He might have even been able to get himself crucified if he committed the right crimes, although he never seemed to commit any of those crimes, and they crucified him anyway. So there are plenty of things that Jesus could have did, but he could not have, by his own effort or human effort, fulfilled even remotely close to the over 300 prophecies concerning his arrival, his life, what he would do, his death, his resurrection. All of those things are spoken of in the Old Testament repeatedly. So we've got biblical references to Jesus being present in eternity before creation. We have evidence of Jesus being a co-worker in the act of creation. We have multiple examples of Jesus making appearances here on earth in the Old Testament. We have hundreds and hundreds of prophecies made concerning his ultimate arrival here on earth, and then the fulfillment of all of those things. That's pretty compelling if you want to argue that Jesus was only a man, that he never existed until he was born. There's an overwhelming amount of biblical evidence that says explicitly that he was not, that he was there in heaven before creation. So, there's an interesting idea, and one that you may want to think about. The next point that I wanted to touch on was the point that all of those other things lead up to, that is his incarnation. Incarnation simply means appearing in the flesh. That's all it means, appearing in the flesh. And the term Messiah, which means the anointed one, goes back to multiple references throughout the Old Testament. I'll give you a fascinating one. I'm sure you may have been taught this before or seen it before. All the way back in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. What is generally considered to be the first prophecy concerning the coming Messiah. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, in somewhat obscure language. You guys know the story. Adam and Eve are getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and the snake is about to get kicked out with them. And so God says to the snake, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed, and he shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. If you took health class in high school, the woman doesn't have a seed. She didn't have a seed. She's got an egg. This is an adult class here tonight, right? PG-13, Bible study. But God says between your seed and her seed. So the very first clue that we get to the Messiah is that of a virgin birth. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Interesting. Then you can move on to things if you wanted to, like Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, which is one of my favorite Old Testament passages concerning this coming Messiah that would be God in the flesh. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 says, For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called. But listen to what he's called. This is the Old Testament, hundreds of years before he's ever born. He will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Hundreds of years before he's ever born, he is called these things. Now, we could exhaust ourselves tonight tracking down hundreds of these Old Testament prophecies concerning the coming Jesus. But if we moved over into the New Testament, we could get into the story of Jesus' birth, Matthew chapter 1 or Luke chapter 1. Both stories we typically hear around Christmas, but both stories that refer to the miraculousness of Jesus' birth. There are still many stories today that people like to tell about who Jesus' father really was, but there's some interesting ideas about the fact that Jesus was